obviously not removing 0-hour contracts, but I guess a review of what a 0-hour contract is the key. So in principle, what they want to do is move away from a 0-hour contract where there are plausible or regular hours worked to an actual hours worked contract. It will be very sector specific as to how that one is.
Welcome to the Payroll Podcast, the show that explores the latest insights and innovations in the world of payroll. Today's episode of the Payroll Podcast is sponsored by Deel. Now take a moment to consider the following pre-show scenario. Imagine you had to visit 6 different houses just to cook your dinner. One place has the pots and the pans, another has the stove, another has the food. You get the idea. Sounds ridiculous, right? Well, the reality is most global businesses operate exactly the same way, using 6 different tools and platforms just to pay their global workforce. But now there's one platform offering truly simple, truly global payroll, and that's today's sponsor. That's Deel. That's Deel. And Deel's fully managed global payroll makes it possible to pay your entire team in over 100 countries and in over 200 currencies, all in one place. So whether you're an enterprise company, a small business, or something in between, Deel is built to meet your unique business needs. With in-house customer success managers, local payroll experts, and more, Deel's fully managed global payroll eliminates third-party handovers and instead provides unmatched compliance and flexibility. In fact, they'll even help you track and flag the latest changes in payroll regulations before they even become an issue. And with 24/7 monitoring and best-in-class security protocols, your sensitive data is always protected. So are you ready to change your global payroll system? If you are, click the link in the show notes to book your demo with Deel today. Hello and welcome everyone to July's edition of Payroll Question Time. My name is Nick Day and I'm here to guide all of you through a number of different things that have happened since we've changed our government. Of course, we've got an expert panel that's going to be joining us to help us navigate the latest significant developments in the payroll sector. It appears the new Labour government has put employment law at the forefront of their manifesto. They've announced they're going to be reviewing enforcement under one umbrella to focus on ensuring employment rights are maintained. How's that going to impact us? Well, they're going to be talking about unfair dismissal, sick pay, parental leave, potential banning of 0-hour contracts, and reinvigorating the single enforcement body as well. Lots and lots to get into today. We also, I understand, just from a quick conversation I had a moment ago, there's been an update to childcare, so I'll come to Simon about that a little bit later on in the show. And we've just been talking about some tax avoidance schemes that maybe some of you may or may not want to be aware of, that if we get time, we'll jump into as well. Lots of conversation going on with our panel before we went live, so it should be an exciting conversation today. Of course, if any of you have any questions, any burning payroll challenges you want to overcome, do put those questions in the questions box. We will try to answer those in real time. We'll be asking our expert panel to hopefully help you overcome whatever obstacle it might be that's holding you back. No such thing as a bad question or a poor question or a silly question, so put anything in there that you like. In fact, I would encourage you all to challenge our panel. They are experts, but we like to put them on their toes a little bit where we can. So put everything you can in the questions box and we'll get through those in real time. In addition to that, of course, we are going to be having a couple of polls today. In fact, there's going to be 2. That's your opportunity to get involved in the conversation. Again, we'll ask our expert panel to comment on those results. So please, when those polls come in, please do activate and get involved in those. We are, of course, recording the session and we will send you the slides post session as well. So you don't need to be scribbling notes. We will send everything you need so you can go back to anything that was really important to you in your payroll later on in the show. And last but by no means least, there will be a survey. Now, this survey is really, really important. The reason it's important is this is where you get the opportunity as an audience to tell us what you want us to talk about in a future episode of the show. So please do have a look at that survey. There's a particular topic you want us to cover, bearing in mind we're going into holiday season, bearing in mind we've got a brand new government in play. There's loads and loads happening right now. This is a chance for you to say, hey, we'd really love you to feature this topic. So please do complete that survey for us as well. And of course, I'm going to read you all our legal disclaimer just to make sure everyone is aware that this presentation does not provide definitive answers to individual queries and in some places takes views on matters which are uncertain. It is not intended to be relied upon in any specific context or as a substitute for seeking advice, legal or otherwise, on a specific circumstance, as each case may be different. Right, let's get into the detail and introduce you to our wonderful panel. I will start with myself. I'm the host of the Payroll Podcast, where you will be able to find an audio version of show, and it'll be republished on all the major audio payroll podcast platforms. So do check it out if you want to hear it back again. I'm also the founder of JGA Recruitment, which is the leading payroll recruitment agency in the UK, Europe, and now the US as well. And this year, I was the fortunate recipient of the Payroll Global Vision Award, which I'm really excited about, so I thought I'd bring it in here. But anyway, that's enough about me. Let's go into our panel, which are award winners and very, very experienced payroll professionals, starting from my left to right. Simon, I wonder if you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Simon Parsons, Director of UK Compliance Strategies for SD Worx. I've been with the business since on and off since 1984, so a few years, just a few, and it's great to be here. I'm thinking, what fame have I got? I've got the JGA Award for Payroll Guru. When was that? The other year? From yourselves, when we all got together in London, and a number of awards from the CIPP, and what was the Payroll Alliance. So that's, I guess, Richard George's group these days, going back some years ago. So it's great to be with you. Lot going on.
Fantastic. 1984, George Orwell sends his regards. Richard, could you introduce yourself, please, sir?
Yeah, hi, Richard George, Director of Education at the Payroll Centre. Thankfully, not quite as long as Simon, but not far off. And you say 84, so yeah, you've got 2 years on me, but I'm obviously a hell of a lot younger. Award 300, obviously we are the largest UK trainer, and have involvement with multiple different, I guess, regimes.
Fantastic. And Matthew, CIPP.
Hi, I'm Matthew. I'm Policy and Research Officer at the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals. At the moment, my award shelf is bare, so if anyone has any awards they want to send my way, I am all open to it. But I'm here.
Most hair, Matthew. How's that one?
Most, yeah, we'll keep going. Andy's on that.
Yeah, he's catching up.
Well.
You get a haircut.
But yeah, so my role at the CIPP is to keep the payroll profession abreast of any new changes in policy and legislation, which at the moment is a very busy time for us. So hopefully we'll have some good discussion today.
Well, I think you should win the youngest PQT panel member award. I think that's very deserving. I'll happy to bestow that upon you, Matthew. Delighted to welcome back Andy Nichols, who's our resident pensions expert. So if you've got any pensions questions as well, please do put those in the questions box, and then we'll come to Andy for those if you have any that you really need answered today. So just a quick reminder, but Andy, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, well, hi. Used to work for the pensions regulator, sort of semi-retired, but really now concentrating on helping payroll with automatic enrolment and pensions, supporting people like Richard, CIPP, and so on in that, and yourselves by being here. So yeah, put those questions in.
Well, delighted to have you back. And last but by no means least, Karen, I wonder if you could introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, 1984, I was finishing school. Sorry, Simon. So I'm one of the younger members, but I do have 30 years in the payroll HR environment, I used to say. I'm a chartered member of the Institute, and I'm privileged to be part of the Reward 300 group. And as always, it's wonderful to be here. And for those of you who are regular listeners or live here, you will notice I have moved back to what I'm calling Armstrong Watson from AAB. So I'm delighted to be here.
Fantastic. Well, delighted to have you back as well, Karen. Right, let's get into the nitty gritty then. Today's discussion topics, lots to get through with a new government in place. So we're going to be talking about the King's Speech as well, all things payroll related, from real living wage to statutory sick pay changes. The King's Speech, your HR overview, including flexible working rights, gap reporting, zero-hour contracts, I mentioned in the intro, and more. The pensions bill, small pots, multiple schemes and consolidations. The latest from the SD Worx Academy, well worth staying for that and just getting an idea of the dates that certain courses are coming up. They're really, really good, and many of them are free to attend as well. Some hot topics if we have a chance to get through those. So again, if there's a hot topic you want us to cover today, put it in the questions box. If there's an opportunity for me to bring that topic to the conversation, I will certainly do so. And just to remind everybody, there is no PQT in August. We've just started the holiday season. I know because both my kids are somewhere outside playing around and we're trying to keep them busy while I'm on this show. I'm sure many of you are the same, but we will be back in September. So plenty of opportunities for you to fill in those survey forms so we can create a really good list of discussion topics for our first session back in September. Right, let's jump in then to the King's Speech special, all about payroll to begin with. I'm going to hand the reins over to Simon to give us a bit of an overview, and then we'll take it from there. Simon, over to you.
Okay, let's try and kick off some of the discussion for us then, Nick. So a number of Labour Party commitments prior to the election, and surprisingly, most of those are included in the King's Speech with a first 100 days target. I'm not sure what 100 days means, whether that's just we'll start introducing the law or whether the law actually starts within 100 days. If it does, we've got a lot of work on. But one of the areas was, call it the real living wage or the genuine living wage, they sometimes term it, and dealing away with age discrimination aspects. So 2 proposals. One is to remove any age banding related to national minimum wage, and the other is to increase it to a genuine living wage. So that's changing the low pay commission's set of goals or whatever to achieve that. So whether that's an immediate or an eventual, I'm not actually too sure. The way it's talked about is we'll do this within 100 days. But so serious potential thought risk in relation to flexible benefit packages. What do you do about budgeting, etc.? If it does rise, the current living wage level set by the Living Wage Foundation, part of an organisation called UK Citizens, is or Citizens UK, may have got it the wrong way around, is £12 an hour, and that's due to be revised and uplifted in November. The second weekend, usually in November, although for the past couple of years, they've announced it in September instead. So they brought it forward for the cost of living crisis. But the normal point of announcing is a second week in November. For those employers who are part of the Living Wage Foundation accreditation, and that has increased, it's about 15,000 plus employers in the UK, they have 6 months from that announcement point. It is subtly different to the national living wage or national minimum wage in the fact that the living wage is about a payment of a rate, whereas the national minimum wage is about the receiving of a rate, and there is a subtle difference. Just had a case come out, so sorry I'm wandering off elsewhere, Nick, but there's just been a case for Lees of Scotland that's drawn about savings schemes, as again holiday savings schemes where the money was held by the employer, breaching minimum wage law. So those are the two. The other aspect that affects us in payroll is, of course, statutory sick pay, which has an element of removing the 3-day waiting and also the lower earnings limit. I'm sure some of the rest of the team here will want to expand on that. Again, a question of when, because these are all part of the 100-day commitment. 100 days is only 3 months and a bit, so it's not very far away. And then we have the other elements that go into employment law and the Employment Rights Bill that's been announced, which is an extension in some ways of the original, what looks to me an extension or a reintroduction of what was the Matthew Taylor review, which was back in Theresa May's days. So there were proposals, and then when moved on, we went into COVID, they seemed to get pushed to one side. It looks like they're all back again. So the single agency, enforcer, Fair Work Agency, potentially policing employment rights and enforcing them, as opposed to individuals having to take their employer to an employment tribunal. Shall I let others speak?
Yeah, well, let's just I'll make a quick highlight to those that are watching this, because I got these updates myself. I was aware of the removal of age bandings because I get both the CIPP updates and I get the ones from the Payroll Centre. So if you haven't subscribed to those, to either of those organisations' newsletters, it's worth doing, because that's how I first came to understand what was going on prior to today's session. And I think it's a really good way to get up to speed. So I'm going to come to Richard, because that was the last update I got, and it was about the removal of age bandings, how it may impact national minimum wage as well. I'm aware there's confusion between living wage and minimum wage, but I wondered if you could just bring us up to speed a little bit there, Richard. Obviously, I know you're behind many of those updates as well, and anything you'd like to add following on from Simon's opening gambit.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're seeing isn't new. I think it's quite important to sort of caveat a lot of this change with the fact that chunk of this has been going on for years anyway. In fact, a lot of it actually goes back to the Employment Bill 2017 or 18, and was the majority of the work that the Labour Party have kind of brought back in. Principally, though, the age bandings has been disappearing over time. And obviously the living wage, which is the highest rate payable, has been dropping in age anyway. So we were only down to 3 relative rates and the apprentice rate, which has been linked anyway. So I think there has been a view of the Labour Party for a number of years to remove the age bandings altogether, on the argument why. Why should you have a lower hourly rate if you're 19 than if you're 21? So I don't think there's been much principal argument against it. I guess the variance is cost. And as with all these things, there will always be that side of it. It's all well and good putting monies up and costs up for employers, but in principle, where is the employer going to find that money? On the secondary to that as well, obviously, is you can't just increase these people by the new living and minimum wage rates. It obviously has to cascade through a business, because you could end up with people earning more on the living wage than people who were above it prior. So the on cost to employment is very, very high, but obviously the rate of pay to the individual is very important twofold. Firstly, obviously, to I guess ensure a construct is in place so that people are paid fairly, but also it's the getting people into work. If you make paid work a more palatable area than not working, then in principle people are going to see more gain from it. I guess the other side is the real living wage aspect and where it'll be driven from. We talked about this actually at a previous meeting. The unions, for instance, who obviously the Labour Party are far more incumbent with, have a very different view on minimum wage to others. In fact, it's a lot higher than £12. So it'll be very interesting to see if there is any further aspect to decisions made and the direction that the Low Pay Commission take on what that final number will look like. It could certainly, I think, very easily push the whole voluntary living wage out of the water, given the rate that they're going to be considering. So I think it's a very interesting area, and I'd say it's a very double-edged sword for employment.
I agree. It looks like some quick wins from a government perspective. It doesn't really cost them, brings more money into them from increased national insurance contributions, and the employers ultimately pay for it. So a way to get everyone on board very quickly without it costing you a penny and making some money on the side. I think, anyway, maybe that's me being taking a cynical view to some of this stuff, not saying it's not good. But what I'm interested in, Matthew, from your perspective, where do you envisage then most of your inquiries coming in here? Because obviously you're involved in policy, you handle a lot of the inquiries coming in from your members. From these announcements, what are the things that potentially concern you the most in terms of where it's going to cause a pinch point in terms of the work that you guys do, or maybe there aren't any, but I'd love to get your take from that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the moment, we're still very early stages. The manifesto that we had was relatively thin on information about what they actually wanted to achieve, and the King's Speech has certainly fleshed things out a lot. But a lot of what we're talking about here, outside of the living wage stuff, is going to be part of that employment rights bill. And at the moment, we just don't have that bill in front of us to be able to look at that finer detail. So really, at the moment, we're waiting on that extra detail. As Simon said, the intention was within the first 100 days. My interpretation of that was always that the legislation would be presented within the 100 days, because I fear that something the size of that employment rights bill is not going to get the scrutiny it needs if it's trying to be forced through within 100 days. In terms of pinch points, I think Richard sort of highlighted a couple with the living wage. If it happens all at once, are we going to see sort of huge employment bills that employers have to deal with, particularly if they've got a large workforce of younger workers that will all be uplifted at the same time. So it's whether they introduce some sort of phasing into that plan. You know, we've just had the Low Pay Commission's long-term plan up to 2024, and they kind of got left with the remit of just maintaining what they'd achieved. This is going to be a big change to their remit, and as we were just saying, I think the key differentiator between the Living Wage Foundation's real living wage and the national living wage that we do have is trying to factor in everyday costs. So potentially we might see that voluntary organisation gets pushed out if that aim is achieved, but in essence that foundation's purpose was to achieve something, and maybe they achieve it, which is fantastic for them. One thing that I've not seen any information on currently, which is something that's always in the back of my mind concerning me a little bit, is we had the private members bill that was reached royal assent in September last year on the extension of automatic enrolment to those 18 and over. Now, I've heard no information on that currently, and I don't know whether we're jumping a bit to pensions at the moment, but if that was to come in at roughly the same time that the real living wage is extended, or the living wage brackets are extended to be 18 and over, that could pose a huge additional burden on employers. So it's about sort of lining those things up and making sure that you don't have a huge shock to the system all at once.
Let's quickly come to Andy then, just in case Andy's got his ear to the ground on this. Any insights you can give us, Andy, on the pension side of things?
I agree entirely with Matthew on that. The DUP, TPR, Treasury and all that, well, they'll be looking at the impact of any of these things crossing over. And there's lots of other things going on, like the dashboard is also due for October 26th, you know, in terms of connecting schemes. So when will these things kick in? When will a 2017 review kick in? Change of government, change of ministers, everything's been held up. So I do know that once DWP issued a consultation on the AE 2017 changes, you know, the reduction of age from 22 to 18 and a lower threshold going to nil for those who've got a scheme which has that lower threshold as the start point for pension contributions, that consultation will tell us the how and the when. Or at least it will give people to be able to feed in when the how, the when and how bits of that change. And so employers logically will hopefully think, wow, if we know about living wage change as well, then we need to feed in the fact that we don't want everything happening all at once and causing employers to suffer. You know,
well,
so we deliberately though.
I've deliberately saved Karen for last, because Karen is actually the one person on our panel who's going to be responsible for making these changes and actually processing the payroll for the people that she's got under her wing and the clients that she works with. We've got Matthew, obviously, in research and policy, and Richard and training, and Simon on systems and legislation. But you're at the coal face of this, Karen, right? You're going to be the person that's going to need to put out these fires. We know payroll people can do it. If it is all thrown at you at once, the payroll industry has shown that before. But what are the things in all this you're going to have to try and prioritize and make sure you're at the cutting edge of all these changes, right? To make sure your clients are able to have their payrolls run accurately. So for the people watching this, many of those are going to be in similar shoes. What advice would you give to them? What do they need to consider?
Well, at the end of the day, I'm sort of with the panel. I don't see how they can possibly bring this in 100 days. If they even try, that would show that they've not been in government for 14 years. The other thing is, of course, at the moment, I've been watching the media and all that, where at the moment they don't seem to be answering any questions to give us that devil in the detail, which is what we really need. Is, you know, a lot of this, as Richard pointed out, has been mooted for quite some time. Matthew mentioned the private members bills, you know, things like, I mean, there's a few employment law cases which will come to it in the other ones, and also the statutory sick pay review that was already ongoing, where it was, you know, to remove things like waiting days. The chatter in the smaller business world, where our clients sit, is, you know, very much, well, that might drive the wrong behaviour, which I think is what came out in that review that was done on sick pay. By that, I'm not saying that people shouldn't have a day one right to have support when they're sick, but by removing waiting days, that and it was felt it could deem behaviour. I wonder whether the government, when it comes to these 100 days, a bit like Matthew said, are they just announcing all the things that they think are wrong? and that they need to look at. But in reality, and which is what businesses are saying, is a lot of this in reality just wouldn't be affordable. There are, some of the taxes that don't affect payroll, there's, where they're looking at the corporation tax, the non-dom tax, the private schools. There's now apparently Germany advertising private school, it's cheaper and there's no tax to be, VAT to be paid. So there's a lot going on that I think the government, whether it's holiday pay, whether it's national minimum wage, because that will impact salary sacrifice as well. It's almost like, are they giving in one but taking in the other? Because obviously the higher the wage, the more likely there'll be tax paid. And of course, there is also the pensions part muted by taking the pension, state pension, what have you, above the personal allowance, which would then bring that into tax. So I think, for me, I'm watching this like you would, and as our clients, there is a bit of concern, there's a bit of unrest, but we need that detail. And at the moment, we don't seem to have it on any of this, other than what we might expect because of those private members' bills, or as Simon said, the Matthew Taylor report going forward. But it would be fair to say businesses are apprehensive, I think would be a word to use, and the government is going to have to settle business down by announcing some decisions.
I think Richard talked about that briefly.
I was going to say, I think there's a few things on top, Nick. The pensions is probably the least of the problems, because they're already talking about a different personal allowance for them. But I think there are, as you say, behavioural changes that could occur is quite key here. If you remove waiting days, it's going to massively, and obviously the minimum wage or the LEL limit, you're suddenly going to increase SSP costs for small employers through the roof, which are not there now. So is that going to change their behaviours around staff going sick? And the answer is probably going to be sadly yes, that they will alter their, I guess, position. But the other thing as well is it's great putting the minimum wage up dramatically, but there are net effects on individuals. Number one, what are they going to do about student loan thresholds? Because all of a sudden you're going to hit people with student loans very, very hard, because they are going to jump brackets. You're going to hit, on top of that, the principal position of universal credit, where again, the rate of pay could significantly reduce or move people away from certain. So I think there is a huge amount of double-edged swordness, to use a very important expression, as to taking and giving is going to become really critical.
I agree. I think if you push it too far, I think it was yourself, Rich, that mentioned, or maybe Matthew, that for some employers that have thousands of people this is going to affect, it could actually result in more unemployment as a result, and that's not what we want here. You might get better benefits and better pay, but if you can't afford to keep your workforce and you can't afford to keep your business operational as a result of some of these costs, actually the negative can impact. So I think there's some balance to be had here as well. I think was it Matthew or Andy or someone mentioned the potential of phasing in of how these things happen rather than making them sudden, which sounds wise as the recipient of listening to all of your expert advice. Simon, I saw you nodding when Richard was talking. Anything you'd like to add?
Not especially. I think it's been a very good discussion around, and I think we are waiting for the details. Certainly, as the chair of the BCS Payroll Specialist Group, I've written to the software development support team from an aspect of when are they going to be ready to talk to us, and I think their timetable is still the end of September. So there's an element of, but then maybe they're still in that position of they don't know either yet what they're preparing for, and only just starting to have the ministers get their feet under the table, as it were, or the desk, and start talking to them and know how to work with them. An interesting group of new ministers that we've got, consequently. I've been following one of the Treasury ministers, and I've forgotten his name already because of nervousness of being on this show, but he used to be the chair of the trade, one of the trade committees, who led some of the interrogation of supermarkets, etc. But and always thought a very clever fella, and we'll see how it goes. Interesting thoughts, because I guess it goes back to Andy as well on the pension front. Is, and then of course, and I've forgotten her name now already. So is it Emma? Yes,
Emma Reynolds.
has kind of a double secretary role, which is new for pensions, to the extent that she's not just part of the DWP, she's part of HM Treasury as well. So there's obviously a different focus of thinking this as Richard has mentioned, double-edged sword. It's a bit of a biblical quote type thing. Richard is actually, on the one hand giving and on the other hand taking in some way. We'll have to see, because of course decisions from one department are going to affect the other, and so they've got that link pin in Emma in being in both and seeing what happens. You think quite a calling for a new MP, but she has been an MP before, but she wasn't a re-elected MP. So change of time, certainly all round.
Is there anything here that anyone would like to add in relation to the holiday law or gangmasters or anything else here before we move into our first poll?
No, I think it's very interesting that going back to the single enforcement body, it had been the plan. Obviously, Grant Shapps sort of pulled the plug on it a couple of years ago and decided to invest in what we had. But I think, it's a positive thing for employment protection. But it's just how long it would take and what form it would have is probably quite a challenge.
Presumably some new fines for non-compliance as well.
Well, yeah, and if you follow the social media, as I know you do and some of the others do, and respond and get involved, you're seeing a highly increasing avoidance, possibly, of some employers on some of these rights, which at the moment the means of duress is going to an employment tribunal. Potentially with a fair work agency in place, there's no need for an employment tribunal. You'll get an inspector, and the person complaining may not be the one that you have to pay. It may be everybody else because they were okay. And that's the risk that people are seeing with national minimum wage audit. I presume that means that HMRC NMW becomes part of the Fair Work Agency as well. As opposed to staying with
the plan with the single enforcement body.
Yeah. So it's an interesting change in the world.
Yeah. Just to add that we are furiously refreshing the bills page on the Parliament website, and currently there's only 10 bills on there from the 40 that were proposed as part of the King's Speech. And the Employment Rights Bill is not one of them. So as soon as we have that, we'll have a lot more information. Well, to be fair, I think that was probably to be expected because it looks to be one of the larger bills that will go through, even in general, but definitely the largest one that payroll professionals and HR professionals need to be aware of.
Well, let's maybe.
I was just going to ask really about the panel. Presumably, these bills won't actually be able to do anything until Parliament returns, because of course the opposition have right to challenge. And this is the other thing that I think we just need to be mindful of, is it's all well and good we have the devil with these bills, but of course, as we've seen over the past few years, opposition, when they change and it goes to Lords and it goes here, it goes there, sometimes they just don't get it through. So I think that will be interesting to see as well. The ones I think that were already in the world will probably go, but yeah.
I've got a bit of a delay on you. The assent will always be very difficult. I guess if there is a positive, and it's no disrespect to Labour, 70% of this was in the Conservative view anyway. So they're not going to argue with something they already wanted. So,
and of course, abolition of the Lords will be in the first 100 days, won't it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. You can do that easily. No worries. But let's jump into our first poll. And we've got 97 of you attending. So I'm hoping all 97 of you can get involved in this poll. We're obviously going to stay with the King's Speech. We're going to talk about some of the HR aspects, the employment aspects in just a moment. And one of these, of course, will be what effect will the 0 hours contract changes have on your business? You can answer this whether you're a business owner, whether you're coming from a payroll management perspective, it doesn't matter. But the response options are none, some, or major. So please give us your responses to those. We'll comment on those results when they come in as well. While we're waiting for those to come in just a moment, we're going to talk about 0 hour contracts and how they're going to be replaced with actual hour work contracts. We're going to talk about firing and rehiring because some of the legislation potentially going to change there as well. Returning to work for maternity and some of the protection measures for new mothers that are going to be brought in, flexible working rights, gap reporting, which isn't just about gender anymore, but potentially disability and ethnicity as well. Long overdue in my mind, but we'll get to that in just a moment. So let's see how these polls are running at the moment. Hopefully it's quite a simple poll to get started. And hopefully all 97 of you have got involved. Let's see where we are. So at the moment, for those that are listening in audio only, we have 75% say none. So this is what effect will zero-hour contracts have on your changes have on your business. 25% say some, and interestingly, 0% say major. So let me come to you, Karen, on these. I wonder if you can just share your thoughts on the results.
As you said, it's quite interesting that none, but of course it will depend on the type of business. It's not going to be all businesses that are going to be impacted by this. Talking to some of the businesses, and obviously I won't name names, but in the, not so much the retail, but in the food takeaway sector in particular, again, it's going to be a case of, already we've seen a slight shift, I think, with the government, where they said an absolute ban to clearly we've got to discuss this with business. So what will it really mean? Be interesting, because it does concern, speaking to those businesses, if they can't offer a 0 hours, which let's just remember that 0 hours can actually be extremely beneficial for those who enjoy having 0 hours, students and the likes in particular. Will that mean that they will have to give everybody a contract and just put a minimum amount in and then do what they do anyway? Or will it in fact mean that they just have to lay off people and just give, and look for sort of the hours that they know they need as a rule, and look at overtime? So I think it'd be interesting. But as saying, with the results itself, I think if you asked a group of people who were in the sector that has a lot of them, then we might have different results.
Sure. Yeah, well, that makes sense. That makes sense. Let's jump into then the King's Speech special, and let's dive into some of those HR potential changes as well. Richard, I know you have been heavily involved in the legislative side and your training and being upskilled. I wonder if you could guide us through some of these changes and kick us off.
Love to. So 0 hour contracts, obviously not removing 0 hour contracts, but I guess a review of what a 0 hour contract is the key. So in principle, what they want to do is move away from a 0 hour contract where there are plausible or regular hours worked to an actual hours worked contract. So that's the principle behind it, hence Karen's view. It will be very sector specific as to how that one hits. Will it see a big change in other areas? I think, it could push people towards annualized contracts, which obviously can be a lot safer bet for some, where you're just guaranteeing X hours per year, but not when those hours are worked, is probably going to be quite interesting. The firing, and again, not being a conservative centric, but again, we're now going to move back into what was already considered. So the firing rehiring again was part of that bill 2017, principally altering the rules on so many cases that we've seen in the past. So you could name, and you can because they're all public knowledge. Obviously P&O was the biggest, latest sort of incorrect method of managing a fleet, but it's happened previously. I think the BBC, British Gas, there's been numerous cases where this changing of the guard in respect of how contracts are accepted has become almost the norm. You may also remember when Asda were purchased, and again, it's been a regular occurrence as a model to alter contract without the employer's opinion. So it's giving more, I guess, stringent policing and control over that. The return to work from maternity, this has again been one that's been dragging on since time began. But what we're looking at now is, I guess, expanding that one as well. So looking at not only mothers, but the parental support. So whether it be a partner returning from shared, and that's 6 months protection once returned from. So for a lady, you could be talking basically 18 months alternatively of protection from the start of their maternity period. We've already seen a tranche of flexible working alterations. The Labour sort of addition to this is obviously the day one right or the day one commencement, which to me seems a bit of a weird one, because you'd think you'd have had that conversation probably during a some kind of interview. So agreeing to a 30-hour job and then on the first day you join asking for it to become flexible does seem a tad bizarre, to say the least, but obviously it is being put there in that respect. And really it's just that continual explanation. So more accommodation of it, more visibility of it, more requirement for the employer to, I guess, put the time into the review of the flexible working, rather than how it's statutorily been in the past, where I've got 3 months to give you a response and that response can be no. So I guess it's investigation into if the required flexibility can't be attained, for instance, looking at other forms of option. So whether it be job sharing or alike. With gap reporting, well, it says what it's about there. Again, we've known the ethnicity's been hanging around for 4 years. They've got to a point, haven't they, where they were looking at 3 different options in about 3 years ago. So neither of these are unexpected in relation to the effect. You can imagine that it will only be for the larger employers in a similar model to the others. But will again create a further requirement for employers.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Well, good overview. I see Matthew nodding. Would you like to add there, Matthew?
Yeah, just to go through, backing up similar things. The 0-hour contracts is a weird one. I think Karen touched on it. Their focus is now on exploitative 0 hours contracts, which again, we're going to keep saying this, we don't have the details of the bill yet, so we can't be sure what they actually plan to do. But I foresee quite a lengthy sort of consultation process with that to try and actually decipher what constitutes as exploitative or not, and what should be allowed, what can't be allowed, whether you feel they've been swayed by businesses or whether they sort of see that there is a genuine need for 0-hour contracts in some situations. That's up for discussion. But it definitely needs to be a little bit of nuance there to allow things to happen, and also to not allow exploitative contracts to happen whether they have hours or not. You can just as easily have an exploitative 5-hour contract than you can have an exploitative 0-hour contract. The firing and rehiring is an interesting one, because they're actually wanting to put that into law rather than just a code of practice that we currently have. So it kind of, the idea there is to make it so that it is easier for employees who feel that they've been aggrieved by this sort of process to seek the restitution that they need because of that. They have a legal position from that. And then kind of jumping down, because the flexible working is sort of slowly progressing as it becomes the new normal. But the pay gap reporting is one that doesn't concern me, but I feel that the gender pay gap reporting, we have gender as a captured field within payroll software because we need it for RTI, or at least we have the gender as per your birth certificate or gender reassignment certificate. That's an entirely different conversation, but we have this data and we have the pay data to be able to do that pay gap reporting. Disability and ethnicity now brings in sort of completely different data that isn't usually held within a payroll system as a sole payroll system. If you've got a fancy HR and payroll system, you may have both of those things, but that new requirement would need quite a bit more backwards and forwards between a HR and payroll department within a business. And I'm glad Karen's nodding as someone who might have to deal with this, but it does bring in additional challenges for businesses. And while on the face of it, it might seem very simple, and it's definitely a good direction to go in. Nick, you were saying that you've been waiting for this for a long time. It is going to require some thought from employers as to how they tackle that situation.
Yeah, and you've highlighted some of the reasons why it needs consideration. Karen, you've been nodding. What's your view here?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this, as we say, is sort of like the firing and rehiring. There are times I don't agree with exploiting people with that, but there does have to change its T's and C's in order to remain a business. So I think that they're going to have to be very careful, and let's see what that detail is if they're going to put it into law. Whereas at least a code of practice allows a case to be heard where an employee is aggrieved and they've got the business. I think there's one going on at the moment with Tesco's, the warehouse staff and what have you. So I think that's one to watch. With the gap reporting, I suppose the bit that makes me feel slightly uncomfortable here is, one, Matthew is quite right. It's not data we would capture in a payroll system because we don't need it. It's not reportable in that sense. So you could argue, well, if it is, we need it. But, when you think of our clients, do I really, it's different with the gender pay gap because we do capture gender and we do capture their pay. That's, in order to pay people. But is it right that an agent knows that an employee has a disability or what their ethnicity is? So that's the bit that I think, just morally, is it right that it sits with payroll? Because it very much would sit with HR and normally be anonymous, except to HR. So I think that's something we'll just have to watch and see. Because if we had to do that, the clients in particular, and Simon, I'm sure will agree, they will expect it to come from the payroll rather than the HR, which means those fields would have to go into payroll.
Yeah. But the quality of the data, when it's not a regulated field, and the fact that people won't want to give it anyway, it kind of gives you this whole, well, if you've only got 40% of your staff confirming ethnicity, sorry, and remember that doesn't necessarily mean colour, it means, places they're from, so on and so forth, then what value is that data anyway? Sorry to be a...
Hello, HR and people leaders. Are you not exhausted from the endless war for talent battle cries? I think it's time for a fresh approach. Which is why at JGA Recruitment, we understand the real challenges you face in sourcing top HR talent. And guess what? We believe we have the solution. Our team is on a mission to revolutionize your hiring process because we're not just recruiters. We're strategic partners dedicated to finding the best HR and people professionals who align perfectly with your company's vision and goals. Let's break the cycle of frustration together. Join forces with JJ Recruitment and experience the difference in hiring better talent faster. Don't let another day go by without taking action. Contact us today by visiting jgarecruitment.com to discover how we can transform your HR team. And here's a bonus. When you visit us, why not sign up for our weekly HR newsletter? Because it's packed with invaluable industry insights and more. We really hope you can revolutionize your HR department by working with JGA Recruitment. Contact us today.
I do wonder if there needs to be a higher threshold for the size of business that needs to take part in that, because businesses over 250 for the gender pay gap, with a complete set of data as far as the payroll data is concerned, seems fine. But when if you start saying to people with 250 employees need to do this reporting, like you said, with potentially incomplete data sets, because people might want to withhold that information, which they absolutely have the right to do you start to get anomalies within the data that can flag things where there isn't actually a problem, or where it doesn't highlight things where there is a problem? Just a random thought.
The only thing with that, Matthew, though, is, and Simon might agree, particularly when you're choosing your software, you will find if you're looking for a particular software for a larger business, let's say. So if you limited it to a bigger business, so more than, I don't know, call it 500, whatever the number, it is possible as the business grows. I'm just sort of thinking, would you be then left with, I need to purchase new software in order to get that? So I think it's, if it needs to be reported, I think from payroll, then I would hope that it becomes mandatory and all payroll software has to have it in, so that we're not left, or when businesses aren't left with this, oh dear, I've gone to 251 and my software doesn't cope with 251, it only goes up to 250 type thing. So I think as long as we bear that in mind as well, but Simon might have a view on that.
Well, before we come to Simon, we've had a couple of observations come in, so I'm going to read these out in the comments box, and I'll come to you, Simon, for your thoughts. I know you've been listening intently, and a couple of nods as we go through. The first one comes in from Ashley, who says, we already voluntarily report sexual orientation and ethnicity pay gaps. For those, we rely on employee voluntary self-declaration to us of their sexual orientation and or ethnicity. Not every employee declares, which distorts the pay gap figures. It will be interesting to see the definition of disability. Again, I suspect not everybody will declare a disability to us, which makes the resultant pay gap figures less meaningful. And a follow-up comment from Rebecca says, I know many people who are reluctant to disclose a disability to their employer, even when their employer is supportive. I can't imagine the pay gap data would be very accurate anyway. So there's a couple of interesting and certainly relevant and useful observations there from our listeners. Simon, I want to come to you and just get your thoughts.
In relation to gaps, yes, there's an element of my initial feeling is I'm a bit skeptical of even of pay gap reporting on gender. How accurate is it? At the moment, you could say it's a compulsory obligation on those employers 250 above. Who's scrutinising the data that they actually put there? And I've been suspicious of a few employers because a few employers declare that their pay gap is zero. And there's an element of that's virtually impossible to be zero. So there's an element of, I don't think you've done the calculations right. You could be close or have reasons, but it won't be zero. That's virtually an impossibility to have. And I think that's the challenge here. I think we talked specifics. Payroll won't know the chosen gender. It knows the HMRC reportable gender. And for gender pay gap, that could be something else. It isn't what you are legally recognised as, it's what you want to be recognised as, and they can be two different things. So the payroll data in relation to gender and the HR data related to gender and the gender pay gap reporting are two different things potentially. Hopefully they coincide. Maybe I shouldn't say hopefully. They might coincide, but they don't have to coincide. There's no legal requirement for them to. And so you just have to be very careful. This is where the SD Worx approach is that we give the ability for ONS essential data to be extracted. The analysis further down is not really a payroll activity. So I'm sort of sympathizing or empathizing with Karen to say, how does payroll know? And I don't think it does, but it can provide the base financial data relating to an individual for someone else to then do the analysis based on associated data that they need to link to that payroll don't know about and don't need to know about. And I think that's a general reality of pay gap reporting anyway, is that the data then needs to be analysed. But I think there are some problems the government are seeing, and why they're promoting this is the current gender pay gap is falling into a bit of disrepute. Well, that's probably not fair to say disrepute. I think it's falling into an element of laziness, of people are not really doing it properly. And again, some of the questions on social media is sometimes I think they're choosing where the pay reference periods fall. I'm sorry, pay reference period is set by law. It's the snapshot date is the date. So they're choosing around it. So they're probably quite close. And there's other elements of thinking that most leadership boards actually make no commentary about what they're going to do about their gender pay gap. So there's quite a sizable proportion that actually have no plan in place, and that must be a concern to government and policymakers to thinking, even if you would recognise the issues and challenges and say you don't know what to do about it, would be better than being totally silent on it or having no plan. Going back to 0 hours contracts a little bit, Nick, the statistical information from the ONS is that the average 0 hours contractor works every week 25 hours. And that must be the basis of where the government are probably saying is some of these people, yeah, they are generally, I'm available on Friday if you need me, and there's a do going on, I don't know, a concert or something, I'll come and help. And I'm a student and that fits in with my student plans and it's the summer now. There's that sort of aspect. And there are other people who I guess are dependents, got maybe rents or mortgages to pay, families, children, where actually they will only be offered a 0 hours contract, but actually probably have no holiday leave because they're told they're not entitled to it. And they say a third, is it, or is it more, don't understand their entitlements under 0 hours contracts and are convinced, because that's what they've been told, they have no entitlement, yet forced to work 25 hours every week with no break. And we could say that doesn't really happen. Well, actually it does. And certainly Vince Cable's sat in front of the post office case at the moment, isn't he, in the House of Lords, when he was the DBT or the Bays or whatever they called themselves at the time department minister, brought in to avoid 0 hours contractors being forced to work, because that used to be the position, is I need you here at 6 o'clock, and if you don't, you're sacked. To say that you've now got the freedom to accept or deny any hours as the employer is to do otherwise. Interesting times. We'll have to see. Maybe we ought to have a gap reporting on the different types of contract status, because I think one of the aspects of the King's speech under HR was to bring in a single status, if I remember rightly. So they're getting, at the moment we've got workers and employees. Yeah, so there'll be the sort of new single worker status where the rights would be aligned across the lot to various things. So you wouldn't get that worker versus employee distinction so much. Interesting time.
Will they align that with tax, Simon?
I think the idea would be to.
Yeah, well, we'll all be the same type of worker, although we have some deemed workers and some non-deemed workers and some zero workers, but we'll all be workers. I don't know. I mean, at the moment, because you still see that argument going on in forums about my rights as a worker because I'm on PAYE, and it's sort of, because you're on PAYE doesn't mean you're a worker. You could actually be a personal service company. So you are an employee, but not the business that's paying you.
I mean, maybe the government needs to create some template documents which you have to use by law. If you're giving a 0 hour contract, you must deliver it in this way, and that's for me would see a pretty simple fix. That it would be an illegality to deliver it in any other way, and therefore on that document they can put all the necessary information that must be highlighted to every employee that goes onto those 0 hour contracts. For me, that'd be a potential fix. Sometimes simple isn't always the way they go.
We've discussed with HMRC in the past, or government in the past, is to give example contract wording that would indicate whether something was one way or the other. I can't remember the exact situation it was, but similar to what you just said, that would be mighty helpful of government, which means it's probably not going to happen.
We've had a couple of comments come in as well, a question as well. So Janice has come in to say, is the pay gap reporting, is the gap reporting of disability and ethnicity going to be the same gender pay gap reporting on an annual basis and the compilation of 3 separate reports? My guess would be we don't know yet because it's not there, but I don't know if anyone's got a separate view on
No, there was, as I said, about 3 years ago, was it? They did sort of get the ethnicity down to 3 options. But it was still going to be annual, but it never moved on from there. And off the top of my head, I can't remember what they were, but they were slightly, very different to each other, because it's weird. What are they classifying it as ethnicity is the biggest start point altogether. Yes. So there's been no drive forward since then as to the content model perception, unless anybody else knows.
Well, I think fortunately so far the model of what earnings and bonus are have tended to stay with the ONS definitions. That's not the difficult bit though, and that's the thing. I can give you the data. What do you want to do with the data? Oh, now that's a different matter because the metrics are so different and varied, and I don't know what you mean. And I think that's the challenge when it comes to it, Richard. And we get that even now on some aspects is. You can label something, but the label means something different to different organizations. So does it mean the same thing? And I don't think it does.
I think you all raised some interesting points. From a payroll perspective, I would agree this looks like it sits more with HR anyway than payroll when I'm talking about the gap reporting piece. I'm really for this because for me it moves the needle, but I see it from a slightly different lens. I'm looking through the lens of a recruitment firm that sees candidates en masse across multiple sectors, multiple roles. And sometimes we can see these disparities in view, and you think there's a problem here. It's not just about gender. There might be a legitimate gap between male and female workers in the workplace in the UK from standard Caucasian British nationals, if you like, but actually there's more gaps than that, and it could be that women are earning more than male workers who are coming from an ethnic minority or whatever. And I think sometimes when you see it at scale, it's something you just want the needle to be moved more in the favour of reducing those gaps. But I totally take that from a payroll perspective, it raises more questions and challenges, and particularly if you're not capturing that information, that makes it very, very difficult to generate a potentially a worthy report at the back end. So obviously needs further thoughts. Simon, I saw you nodding again. Is there anything you want to add to that before we jump into our next poll with our team?
Well, I think there's a general data concern. I think we've talked about it before with worked hours. What does that mean? Reasons for not reporting. There's an element of, I think they're all good to know. I don't think we need a defined description. We can have that open to interpretation. The problem is further down the line when you've then got an agency that over-analyse what you're meaning and hold you to account to something on their understanding. Based on something that's completely meant something different. And we've seen that, you've probably heard me bang on about it before. We've got large business unit making interrogation of RTI, FPS file data for things that have no interest to HMRC, but seem to be analysing it down. And you think sometimes a little data can become dangerous in the wrong hands. But at the moment, I think there's an element as a general principle of getting sight of what business is and understands, and to understand, because the whole purpose of gender pay gap reporting wasn't for gender equality purposes in relation to equal pay, because that's been a law since the 70s. It was to identify what actually happens to people. And also, I always thought the diagram was really interesting, and got to be careful with the expression of the use, but they used the term lost women, so which were those because the bulk of care for children and elders fell disproportionately on females than males, yet and so they had that gap in the state that when they returned to the workplace after elderly parents had passed on or children had grown up, they entered at low levels, whereas their male peers were elevated up with no opportunity to catch up. I think we'll probably see similar cultural things happening as well. And I think you're probably right, Nick, because there's an element of, does ethnicity start to play into people ending up having to take roles in lower paid industries or healthcare or certain types as opposed to others, because there is an intrinsic bias within society.
Yeah, well, I think you raised good points. That's exactly the way that I'm viewing it. I think that there probably would be my answer to that. I mean, thinking if we take it back to shared parental leave, just going back to what you were talking about there, Simon, great in theory, great in concept, but actually my understanding, unless it's shifted, and you've got a panel here that can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the uptake for shared is pretty minimal, right? We haven't seen a huge cultural shift there. I certainly know with my two children, it wouldn't have. I don't think anything would have shifted from my perspective in my personal household, and I don't know if the data seems to be suggesting the same for most. I don't know. See you nodding there, Karen, but I mean it's great in concept, but actually in reality, it doesn't always have the desired effect.
Very, very low take up. Very, very low.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was an interesting social media post the other week. I'm going to say it's probably too dangerous to talk about, or is it, about the mother that complained to her husband's workplace that he wasn't allowed to be taking parental leave, etc., and only to find out that he was taking parental leave, but not with her.
Oh, Okay, ouch. No, I haven't seen that. I will be Googling it after this session. But thank you for that, Simon. You've given me something else to look up. But listen, let's jump into the poll. The second poll of the day is going to bring Andy into the conversation in just a moment. The second poll relates to pensions, and it obviously links to our next section of the show, which is going to be about the pensions bill. So how many pension pots do you have? Response options for those in audio only are just 1, between 2 and 4, 5 or more, or I have no idea. While we're waiting for everyone to click those responses, I'm just going to highlight, I've put it into the chat box to the right. There is a new payroll podcast out today. It's titled Top 5 Emerging Technologies Transforming Payroll Management. It's with a guy called Benjamin Tallon. I had a really fun conversation with him. He's a bit of an AI expert. He's an expert in software transformation and business. I think it's a really interesting show. So if you haven't subscribed to it or listened to it, please do check that out. It's on Apple Podcasts or any of your favorite shows. And I also highlighted one that was released just a week ago because it's had really good feedback, and it's talking about the link between payroll and global mobility. We've talked on this show in the past about how we see these roles coming closer and closer together. And I talked to David McAllister, who talks about the secret to effective global payroll management, which is very much talking about global mobility, the future of payroll, and how we see these industries converging. So if you're interested in those subjects, please do check it out. You can get it on any of your favorite podcast channels. If you prefer video, it's on YouTube. You can see the live interviews with me chatting to these guests in real time. So please do check it out, review, let me know your thoughts. And yeah, hopefully you enjoy those. Hopefully that's given us enough time to get some results to this poll as well. So let's have a look at these results. How many pension pots do you have? Mixed bag here. So just 1 is 22%, between 2 and 4, 66%, 5 or more, 12%. And I have no idea, 0%. Now I would, in theory, come to Andy for these results. I'm not going to that because he's going to be I'm going to work him to the bone in just a minute as we talk through the pensions bill. So let me come to you, Karen. Let me know your thoughts on these results.
Well, I'm really pleased. Most of the listeners will hopefully be payroll or HR or pensions. So it'd be good to know. So between 2 and 4. Again, it will be generational, or if they're like me, I decided I was sick and tired of tiny little pots and put them all into one myself. I think the one thing I would say here is, and I know that Andy's going to be talking about the pots and the things that are going to be coming, is just to sort of, I think the government need to make this process easier because it was quite difficult when you're trying to transfer pensions from one pot to another. But yeah, I'm not totally surprised, and I'm so pleased nobody has no idea, given our industry.
I would agree. Well, let's jump into the pensions bill then. Andy, I'm going to let you take the floor. We're going to be talking through small pots, retirement product, not just saving pots, helping people keep track of multiple schemes, the consolidation of defined benefit market, and triple lock. Andy, take the floor.
Indeed, yeah. Hi. I mean, obviously, Labour government have said they're going to do a major pensions review anyway. So watch this space. The pensions bill being the first part of that, phase 1, which is about how do you unlock the £2 trillion of money in pension schemes to enable that to be invested effectively in the UK, and also at the same time, therefore, in a way that gives good retirement outcomes for ourselves as pension people in pension schemes. So this is all phase 1, and obviously, as I think Richard mentioned, a lot of these things are what was already ongoing with the previous government, so they're just continuing along. So it's really good to have a pensions bill straight away to continue the issue with small pots. As Karen quite rightly pointed out, she did a good job by the looks of it, consolidating those small pots, and the government have been looking at this, the previous governments, for some time. And yes, they are thinking in terms of automating it. So how do you get a simple process that will allow you, when you've got small pots, which I think a definition of small pot, if my memory is right, is up to £1,000. But even so, if you've got multiple pots, do you want multiple pots, or do you want to try and reduce it to a smaller number so it's easier to manage? And how easy is that process? But let's make it as easy as possible, but obviously with the thought of mustn't allow pension people to scam you into putting the money from a valid pension scheme into a non-valid pension scheme, and then they keep the money. So obviously there's a lot of work to be done, but some of it has already been underway, and consultations and stuff will kick in, no doubt, to finalise it. But small pension pots are normally not profitable for the pension scheme. The government have put safeguards in place to stop the old pot being eaten away with charges, but we know, or the regulator, the government know that well-run, so well-administered, good finance, good people, good systems, pension schemes offer value for money. So they're looking at the whole pension industry in terms of small pension schemes which aren't well-run, aren't good schemes. They're not going to give as good outcomes for individuals as they should, and therefore the regulator will go around starting to close schemes that aren't offering value for money. And then you'll have larger, more well-run schemes which will, in theory, offer better value for money and therefore better outcome at retirement. Which is where the government are going with that phase one thing about if you can invest £2 trillion in pension schemes, well, actually that means that the money you've got invested in that pension scheme will grow better and give you a better pension. You know, that's the joined up thought behind it all. But Karen's right, you know, what's best for you in terms of your pension, having multiple spots or having them automatedly connected together. Hopefully that will happen, and watch this space.
Right.
They are looking at pension super funds still, so that's going to continue. So where you've got an employer with a DB scheme, the employer is liable to ensure there's enough money in that pension scheme to cover the final person who's entitled to a pension from that scheme. If that employer goes out of business, that pension scheme may not have enough money in it, and therefore the people who are entitled to a pension may not get the right amount, and the pension protection fund will probably pick that up, but it won't guarantee 100% being paid out. So how do you help the employer take that risk that they're the ones that need to make sure there's enough money in that scheme, and they help ensure the individual member is going to get the right pension? Well, the employer could transfer their DB scheme into a pension super fund. There's only one at the moment, Clara Pensions. There's no legislation behind it, so it's something the pension regulators created the rules around what is a good pension super fund. So if you've got a DB scheme, which may be closed to new entrants, then you may find that gets transferred out of you as an employer into a pension super fund. And obviously legislation needs to be put in place to actually regulate that properly. Although not to worry at the moment, Clara Pensions there's a lot of rules put in place by the regulator to ensure that is well run. But if you've got a DB scheme, that may impact payroll, because all of a sudden you're doing something different, or at least paying money over to a different scheme, different calculations maybe even. Occupational pension schemes, if you've got one, so it's the trustees, etc., or with it, so it's that you've got a pension scheme as an employer, set of trustees. You may just find at the end of the piece you've got a pot of money as an individual, but you then got to go to the market and find out what to do with that pot of money. Well, actually, the government is saying that those pension schemes will need to put something in place to enable you to have a retirement option, which could be to have a pension in payment, to withdraw funds, etc. What they call decumulation solutions. The thing which we've already mentioned, which is worth talking about, is the pot for life. The government, previous government, mentioned a pot for life. So you as an employee have a pension scheme to start with, and that pension scheme followed you from one employer to the next. That was muted. A lot of work needs to be done on that. Not mentioned in the pensions, but at least I didn't see that. So watch the space to see what happens with that. And obviously a 2017 review wasn't mentioned either, see what happens. And if you didn't submit your query on that survey, and you are someone who doesn't know if you've got any pension pots, or you've lost them, then there is a pension tracing service which is free, which is just go to gov.uk and find it. And then you can find all your pots you've got, and then you think about consolidating them, or maybe wait a bit until the government puts something automatically in place. But there'll be consultation. A lot of pension schemes will feed into that. See what happens. That's me.
Great.
I think.
Could I mention something?
Of course you can, Karen.
It was just something that's been, I think I'll put the caveat, there's been a lot of media focus around this, and this is on the local government pension schemes for any of our listeners who are involved with that or even a member of. I'm a deferred member, but I represent deferred members on the Cumbrian Local Government Pensions Board. The one thing I'll be watching carefully is because whilst the Chancellor wants to perhaps merge all the schemes into one, having seen what officers in an LGPS actually have to do to merge all those, I think would be a train crash at the very minimum. But the other thing is where she's almost sort of saying she wants to unlock money from the LGPS scheme to invest in British business. And again, I think that's something she's going to have to be very, very careful about, because the LGPS, indeed, like other pensions, its priority is to invest in the best interest of its members, not what the government of its time would like to do with money. So I think it'll be interesting. Again, I do put the caveat that it's the media putting this spin on it. So I'll just caveat that. But again, it's something for those who are involved in the LGPS, whether as officers listening to this call or perhaps your employer has an LGPS scheme, so that's local government pension scheme, to just watch this space. That is being muted as all part of how the government might take money from pensions to do something else with. But I think we just need to bear that in mind. The government can't actually just do that because the scheme has to protect the members.
Thank you. That follows sort of the encouragement that's been going on for a few years with Guy Opperman, is it? And the proposals of government to try and get pensions to invest more in the UK. I'm wondering, I'm not seeing much in the bill so far in aiming at employer responsibilities and good value. And I'm thinking, except I guess it's going down the route, Andy, thinking that they're saying a number of pension schemes have set themselves up as big pots of money, and they don't actually offer any pension payment mechanism at all. So what are they? I guess is probably the question there. I guess you can do a drawdown from them, but there is no actual pension payment vehicle from some of those offerings. And I guess a lot of employer choice over recent years has probably been one of cost. So as opposed to member outcome potentially. So would there be a focus that under pension AE there becomes more of a responsibility on an employer to plan better outcomes for their employees as opposed to just saving costs as little as possible for whatever they can get away with?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the government have said in their pensions bill they want those schemes that don't have a solution to put a solution in place so that their members can get a pension of some form. There's some way of getting that money in a proper way out of the scheme, rather than just taking a pot of money and trying to buy an annuity in the marketplace.
Open market.
Yeah, which, well, you know, they should provide that. And the LGPS, I agree. There's 87 different local authority, LPS, LGA will be involved in all that.
Yeah.
Government do want the money invested because but they have said productive investment, you know, as in it's got to be a good investment, hasn't it? It's got to be worth, you know. And pension schemes are right. You're right. Pension schemes have to look after their members and get good outcomes.
It's an interesting aspect, I think, with the LGPA, Karen, or the LGP, is the fact that the rule set or the handbook is the same for all of them, but they all subtly slightly different because the interpretation of the rules has been undertaken by 76 different groups. Is that fair to say?
It is, and don't forget there is pooling already. So there are a number of funds that have merged in what they're calling the pooling. But I think it's the only reason it was really fresh in my mind is just recently, Cumbrians obviously, as they do each year, and certainly actuarial, if I can get the words out, when they're looking at their investment strategy, you know, there are guidelines. TPR absolutely scrutinise LGPS. More so than maybe people realise. You know, it's not just private fund pensions that the TPR look after, as Andy will testify to. But when they're looking at their investment strategies, they're looking at small, medium and long term. So I think and they do invest in British, certainly the ones I see, but I say they've just always got to be mindful. Those investment strategies, again, are scrutinized by external auditors, so I think it's just, I say, it could just be the media spin, but I think it's just for people just to be aware that, the government couldn't do that because the funds have an obligation to their members, so they are protected to a degree. And I say, to combine, it took years for pooling to happen, whereas a number of schemes got together. So it would take a long time to merge all those schemes. One advantage, though, if I may say, of doing that is maybe we'd have one specification to upload. That would be great. That would be a positive outcome of that.
Well, I want to change the conversation slightly, only because we're recording this on the 25th of July, and it's not in our slides because it's, we're trying to cover real-time issues. But we obviously, on Friday the 19th, there was a major IT crisis that hit organizations worldwide when a bug and an update by CrowdStrike, which had a serious impact on the Microsoft Windows systems, locking machines, putting them into those endless cycles. The blue screen of death, people couldn't access it. It's estimated that 8.5 million devices were affected worldwide. We had flights delayed and banking systems went down and all sorts. I'm assuming there must also, I don't know if anyone on our panel has experienced this, maybe Matthew got calls, maybe your clients did, Karen, but I'm sure there must be payroll teams that were impacted that probably now face a backlog of processes and workloads they've got to deal with, got to make sure your people get paid, because if they're not paid, they're going to leave or get upset and all those different things. So I wanted just to bring this to the fore because I think it's relevant for this week. I think it's a reminder that everyone needs a solid recovery strategy in place, and perhaps this is something we need to delve into more detail on a future episode of PQT. But in particular, while it's live and while it's still hot and people are still frantically probably trying to catch up with the backlogs, and I can see Karen laughing, maybe laughing is, in the way that you are. I just want to find out from the panel whether you were impacted by what happened, and what kind of plans businesses have had in place or should have in place to mitigate. Karen, I'm going to come to you because it sounds like you may have some experience of this.
Well, given we have a BACS audit coming up in September, I had the privilege of putting our DR into place, so our disaster recovery plan. Thankfully, we had one client that we had to run the BACS for, but the HSM, which is the electronic way and the modern way of submitting BACS, went down. So we had to revert to the old card reader. In fact, I think I was chatting to Simon, and when I had to for this preparation of this, because I had to go because we had to put the DR into place and check that the card reader worked. So we had to go back to something we did years ago, but it was now DR. So we were impacted. Clients we know were impacted in different ways with their own systems. We had clients, people who couldn't attend meetings because of the trains. So it did have a major impact. The fact that it was CrowdStrike, I think, concerns many. Given they're there to protect, which also leads me to, was it really? But maybe that's just the conspiracy theorist in me that wonders that. But yes, we were, but I'm very pleased to say, as Simon knows, I was very relieved that it worked.
Well, good. Well, I'm pleased to hear that. Something I want to make people aware of or vigilant for, and as a small business owner myself, I've had a couple of these emails come in. You do get, I've been getting some phishing scams, if you like, coming in saying, hey, if you've been impacted by the outage, go here and here. And I just want to make sure, because we're not going to another PQT till September, that if you are running payrolls, that you're very, very vigilant to some of these phishing scams that are going in, particularly if you have been impacted and you are trying to catch up, because that's when we suddenly click on things we wouldn't usually click on because we're in a sort of a bit of a muddy puddle. So I saw you nodding your head, Matthew. I wonder if you've got anything to add. I don't know if you've had any reports or any people calling you, asking for help with what went on, but it'd be great to get your take.
I was on holiday over the weekend, so avoided the whole thing. Was out there before all the issues at the airports and was back after everything was resolved. So I avoided the whole thing. But exactly what Karen just said then, having a disaster recovery plan is great. And sometimes things like this can happen and make you think of weird ways in which you can sort of route around certain things. It only affected Windows machines, for example. So do you have a mix of Windows, Linux and Mac operating systems within your offices? Obviously, something the size of this isn't necessarily just down to you. It's suppliers and what sort of systems you're using, on the internet that could be affected. So I think in this situation, there's not a whole lot that some people could have done about these things. But I think, as Simon will tell you, don't push out changes on a Friday.
Yeah, good. Yes, good. That's good advice. I'll come to Simon on that as well.
Crowd strike.
It makes sense. I think it's a start reminder, though, right? But we think we've got everything ready and it won't impact us. A bit like the pandemic as well. We don't know what's around the corner, and I think this is probably to highlight that we're going to see more of these disruptions happen in the future as well. We're moving into an ever more digital world, and when we go to more digital, devices and ways of working, there's going to be more attacks like this coming through. So, or bugs or whatever else it might be that causes an outage. So you may think you've got everything ready and it will never happen to you, but that could be dangerous to think that way. Simon, I'm just going to come to you to finish this before we open to the SD Worx Academy. If you had any thoughts, or yourself, Richard, if anything to add to the outage.
No, I was able to shop at Tesco, so I was happy. So.
Good man. Simon, I'll come to you again.
Well, you'll know that we had an active attack over a year ago, and which
Indeed.
we successfully resisted. And I guess this wasn't an attack at all. This is just a bug. So the fault of an internal software release. Fortunately, it didn't affect ourselves at all. But I think there is an element of you do have to be vigilant and have your alternate traces, because even if you resist or you're not even actively subject to the problem, you do need to be aware that you will be impacted, because of course you don't know what your customers are going to do, whether their data can get to you, what their systems are doing, etc. So there's always an element, and there's an element of it's a bit like you can be driving safely down the road and someone hits you and it's not your fault. You will be disrupted for a little period of time whilst you have to get your car repaired. And that's the thing with all these sorts of things, is just be prepared for the disruption. Fortunately, I've got to say this time around, we weren't overly impacted. Some of our clients may have been at SD Worx, we weren't. And, and it's good to have things in place. But when it does impact you, it does take an element of recovery. Even with DR plans, to instigate that will take a period of time, and as quick as you can, great. But yes, I agree with Matthew. Don't release on a Friday. Useless. We don't release any payroll changes on a Friday.
Well, let's jump into our SD Worx Academy then before we close the show. Some really essential summer courses and beyond that you may or may not want to be involved in. 14th of August, we've got the UK Payroll Part 2, Starters, Leavers, Student Loans, Statutory Payments. 23rd of August, How Clean Is My Payroll? 6th of September, Holiday Pay. 20th of September, The Real Living Wage. 11th of October, My HMRC Account Is Out of Balance. The 18th of October, Payrolling Benefits in Kind. And the 25th of October, Salary Sacrifice, What Is It and Why? While I go about putting the link to that academy in the chat, so anyone that wants up for courses can do. And I'll come back to you, Simon, just give us a brief overview about some of these courses and what they might expect. And then we're good to close the show. So over to you.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's a lot of change coming up, and so I think you need to be aware of it. And so these are an aid to get people to plan, predominantly for April 25, but if the government pushes some things earlier than before, because doing things like a payrolling benefits in kind implementation takes effort and planning. I think a lot of people think is, we just don't have to do those P11Ds anymore. You still got to do something. You still got to get the data. You still got to tax the benefits. It's just a different way. But we've had a number of people that have sort of think, well, all you've got to do is register and you're done. And it's not true. There's a lot more work to do. So, so there's opportunity to catch up with these things. The real living wage will be due soon after. So if people are really wanting to accredit themselves and move on, this will teach you the process of getting ready, and so they're geared around a timetable for the future. And if you're not busy in August, we've already got takers on the 2 courses there for payroll training. Feel free to join. Excellent trainer.
They're all in the next 100 days, Simon.
Right.
Or within the next 100 days, and we'll even deliver them in the next 100 days as well, Richard.
That should be your new course, the next 100 days of payroll. Learn what you need to do here.
I'm thinking of doing one. You have to look out for that. Yes, we'll do a freebie, and we'll start our preparing for 2025 series soon. Although that might be preparing for the 100 days after the 4th of July series.
Well, I'm very much from my side, we're looking forward to hopefully catching and connecting up with all of you in person, because just after we come back for our next PQT in September, which is going to be on the 26th for those of you, so do put it in your diaries now, sign up. Even if you can't make the session, you'll still get a copy of the show and the slides, so register for that as early as you can. And then hopefully I'll see many of both the listeners and the panel at the CIPP annual conference and show and awards up at Celtic Manor in October, which is 2nd and the 3rd of October, which is usually all of you in attendance. I will certainly be there, and I look forward to catching up with you all in person, having a drink or two. So do come and say hi. If you're someone who's a regular attendee to this show, come and say hi to us all. We'd love to catch up in person. You can tell us about the things we can do better or new topics to discuss or anything like that. It just leaves us to wish you all a wonderful summer holiday. If you've got kids, go and have a great holiday, have a great time, have a great break. If you haven't, hopefully it's a nice summer month for you all to enjoy some rays of sunshine. We don't get many at the moment, but today it's been pouring it down in Devon, so I'm hoping that's about to improve. But I'm very much looking forward to seeing you all again on the 26th of September. So thank you, Simon Parsons, thank you, Richard George, thank you, Matthew O'Crig, thank you, Karen Thompson, and thank you, Andy Nichols. I've been Nick Day, and we'll look forward to bringing next Payroll Question Time on the 26th of September. Thanks, everybody. Today's episode of the Payroll Podcast has been sponsored by Deel, the all-in-one global people platform that simplifies how you pay your global teams. Deel's fully managed global payroll makes it possible to pay your entire team in over 100 countries and in over 200 currencies, all in one place. So whether you're an enterprise business, a small company, or something in between, Deel is built to meet your unique business needs. With in-house customer success managers, local payroll experts, dedicated points of contact, and more, Deel's fully managed global payroll eliminates third-party handovers and it provides unmatched compliance and flexibility. In fact, they'll even help you track and flag the latest changes to payroll regulations before they even become an issue. And with 24/7 monitoring and best-in-class security protocols, your sensitive data is always protected. So are you ready to transform your global payroll system? If you are, click the link in the show notes and book your demo with Deel today.